welcome to you all. You may be seated. I'd also like to especially welcome Marcus's family joining us via live stream right now, including Bert Hurn, his dad, Ashley Hurn, his brother, and Danielle Warner, his niece. His mother, Dixie, predeceased him. The first time I talked with Marcus was before I arrived in New Hampshire to start at the law school. We were on the phone for about an hour and a half, which seemed unusual at the time, but doesn't at all to me now. And it was the first time I realized that I would be his student too. He introduced me to Franklin Pierce Law Center through his eyes. He told me about Bob Rhines, about Bob Viles, about the teaching philosophy of the school, and about how he felt things had gone right and wrong over the years. He told me one by one of all the teachers who were instrumental in the development of the school, mostly retired at that point, including personality quirks and detailed descriptions of all of their appearances. So I felt truly part of the history of the institution. During our conversation then, I wrote down the phrase that would become the theme of speeches for years to come, that here we don't just teach students to think like lawyers, but to be lawyers. I told him at the time that that was going to become our mantra, and it did. And he would remind me of this, the phrase's origin, for years to come, with a gleam in his eye. Marcus's stories were not filled with people, but with characters. I'm reminded of a quote from Michael Chabon's Mysteries of Pittsburgh, where he said, "The people I loved were celebrities, surrounded by rumor and fanfare. The places I sat with them, movie lots and monuments." Marcus's stories, his characters, in fact, I might go so far as to say his views of academic policy and practice and Robert's Rules of Order, were fit for movie sets and monuments. He had that way of summarizing situations and people, explaining them in poetic and sometimes characteristically sardonic terms. In his last email to me a day or two before he died, he described someone to me, "Most Mennonites are not so dreadful." As I look back through my correspondence with Marcus over the years, I see things like, he's a somewhat touchy man who can easily take offense at inadequate expressions of gratitude. Or, he had never developed a respect for or really understanding of what looked like ordinary language. It didn't help that he had dabbled in linguistics via Noam Chomsky. I conduct annual reviews for faculty, and the faculty reflect on their year. We talk about their scholarship and their teaching and their service and how I can help them going forward. Pretty standard stuff. During my first annual review with Marcus, I'd only been at the school a few months, and I had sort of notes to, next ask about scholarship. So I asked him about his scholarship, and somehow he ended up telling me this very long story about Provincetown, about a gallery show where he was present at the same time that there was a painting displayed of him in which an artist had painted him nude, and a customer came in, was sort of looking at him and then back at the painting and at him and back at the painting. Over the weekend, I tried to look back on my notes of this meeting to remember the details, and my notes are tellingly sparse. This is not exactly the kind of thing you want to write down in your file. But after he walked out of my office, I thought, but what about his scholarship? I don't think we ever got there. I understand that the book of Ruth in the Bible was a favorite of Marcus's. Now, I don't know what was important to him about this book of the Bible exactly, and I'm really sorry now that I can't ask him. Perhaps in his next annual review. But I'm going to tell you what I see in it. In the book of Ruth, there's Naomi, a woman from Bethlehem, and she had 2 sons. And her 2 sons married 2 women, Ruth and Orpah. And all of them together emigrated far away from Bethlehem to a foreign land. And after a short time, the 2 sons died. Naomi was heartsick, and she knew that her daughters-in-law would have to go back to their families, as was the law and the custom of their land. But Ruth made a choice. It was a radical choice. Even though Naomi was not her blood relative, even though it was not common for 2 women to forge a path together, she would choose to be with her. And Ruth said to Naomi, "Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried." For me, the book of Ruth is about chosen family. Marcus had a wonderful family history, biological family that his father shared with us, fitting for movie lots and monuments. Thank you so much, Mr. Hurn, for sharing this with us. His great-great-grandfather was a stowaway on a ship from Italy, where he hid in the hold and then settled in the Ozarks. Marcus had relatives on both sides of the Civil War, Irish-American on the north side and English-American on the south. Marcus himself was president of his high school student body, won 2 Missouri state championships as a debater, and he was apparently 3rd in his class only because he was so busy winning debate championships. And in addition to his wonderful family, Marcus had a chosen family. I think Marcus chose Franklin Pierce and his students to be his chosen family. This institution lived in his heart. Marcus had strong opinions about things, and we all love him for that. But whatever he thought came from a place of what he perceived was the best for this law school and for his students. He loved teaching and his students more than anything. Like Ruth, Marcus chose this school and its people. Its people were his people. All of the school's characters, perfections, and imperfections, Marcus chose as his family. On New Year's Eve this year, Marcus shared with me a story about a student long ago who'd been almost kicked out of school. The school agreed to give him 1 semester with this student to see if if he could turn him around. And this is not like the first story I've heard like this. I think that there must have been this kind of Marcus school of last resort or something over the years. So Marcus took this on as a project. First, he had the student brief all New Hampshire Supreme Court opinions as they came down. That was terribly unsuccessful. He was almost at his wit's end when he thought of translating law into computer language. Yeah, I was exactly how I felt. And wouldn't you know, once he employed these creative methods involving translation of a complex Article 2 decision into Polish logical notation, he said the key had turned for the student. So he wrote to me on New Year's Eve, "These are some of the things of which I am most proud." The student had reached out to him to share his successes throughout the arc of his career and said, "You know, all of this happened because you stopped to help me off the bridge, iced with cold, icy waters flowing rapidly below, in some ways like Clarence did to help George Bailey off the bridge in the 1946 movie It's a Wonderful Life, creating a way for another productive and meaningful life devoted to serving the interests of others and laboring to make the world a better place." These are the things of which Marcus was most proud. During the pandemic, when many professors decided to teach remotely, Marcus taught in person. The students really appreciated this, but sometimes it was physically challenging for him to do so. I went to discuss this with him one day, and I went to ask him whether he would rather teach from his home and if there are ways we could help facilitate that. But he did not want to hear a thing about it. He cut me off, looked at me with that piercing, blue-eyed gaze, and I understood in no uncertain terms that that topic of conversation was off limits. To be honest, I felt a little scolded, and I was just really glad he didn't ask me to do anything in Polish logical notation, because I don't even know what that is. Under no circumstances did Marcus want to be separated from his classroom and from the students and teaching he loved so much. Marcus, wherever you are, thank you for being our Ruth, for choosing us, for 40 years making this school and thousands of your students a part of your family. I would like to ask you all to join me in a moment of silence in Marcus's honor. I'd like to invite Professor Sophie Sparrow up to the stage.
Hello, welcome. It's great to see you all here. I'm going to talk to you about Marcus as a colleague. And I have to say that when I started the law school nearly 30 years ago, I was terrified of the man. The look, the three-piece suit, the bow tie, his incredible knowledge, his forbidding gaze, his opinions, which were so strong, terrified me, absolutely terrified me. And I lived in perpetual fear that he thought I was a complete idiot. One time we were at a committee meeting, and he looked at me with that Marcus look he has. And he said, "What Myers-Briggs type inventory are you?" And I told him. And there are four, as many of you know, he used to administer the Myers-Briggs type inventory to all of our entering students. And there are four sort of categories, if you will. We were polar opposites on every single one. And so I thought, okay, now I am doomed forever because he and I are opposites. But instead, he was the kind of person, and this is one aspect that I want to talk about, is his open-mindedness and flexibility, even though he could be so strong-willed and so opinionated about things. So he was also the one to say, if you're on a committee or if you're working on a project, don't work with people who are just like you. It's not going to be helpful. You're much better off if you have a range of different personality types, if you will. So he was flexible about some things, despite these opinions. And in faculty meetings, he was quite scary. His hand would go up, that he was waiting to be called on, and you'd think, oh no, here comes a speech, we're all going to be scolded. And he would start with a pronouncement like, "That is hooey." And then he would go off and talk about this. He had these great proclamations. I didn't know about the debate championships, but makes total sense. And he would do this parade of horribles that some policy we were going to undertake or undo was going to send us down to the depths, and Franklin Pierce, as it was, would never exist again. Our community would be ruined. So back in the day, we also had something called all-school meetings, and they were, I believe, held once a semester, once a year, and different topics were under discussion. And one year, I was in charge of career services at the time. The issue was class rank. Now, Marcus believed strongly, and it was the faculty policy and the school policy, that we were not allowed to give school rank. And the idea behind that was that it would foster needless competition and strife and ill will. So the reality was, the only way you could get your class rank is if you showed, now this is pre-internet, if you could show an ad or a poster saying, please apply for a job, top 20% only. You could take that ad, copy it, take it to the registrar, and then find out whether you were qualified. So that was the only way you could find out. But if you wanted to know your class rank, it didn't matter whether you were actually applying for the job, you just took that over and found out. Well, top 30, am I in the top 30? Nope, okay. So we had this school-wide meeting, and the students were all in favor of this because they were just doing the workaround anyway. Faculty were kind of mixed. Marcus was adamantly opposed, gave his speech, adamantly opposed, talked about the parade of horribles. And then when he realized that everybody else in the room, except for him, was in favor of this, he went along with it, and he voted for it. which really struck me, that he could be so opinionated about something and then realize, okay, if there's a good reason for this, like this is for the school and it's for the students, I'll do it. The other thing about Marcus is, as a colleague, he was incredibly generous. When I started teaching remedies, which, as some of you know, is a course that sort of crosses a lot of different disciplines, and I would have some crazy complicated case involving injunctions and equitable estoppel and latches and all that old English word stuff. And I would go to Marcus's office, which was next to mine, and say, okay, help me understand this. And he would explain it to me. I was his student too. So very generous. He also was very generous with his time and giving to people. We used to have a public interest auction every year. The crowning event, if you will, the grand finale, was the item, which was Marcus's donation, which was an evening with cocktails and cigars and poker with Professor Marcus Hurn. And it was always last on the program because it was the single most highest drawing bid. And you'd talk to students afterwards. I mean, there'd be these groups of students who would have ganged together, and you'd see them huddling like, no, we can go up another $100. And they would be fiercely competing and outbidding each other. And then after that, those gatherings happened, I would look at the students who had gone and I'd say, so how was it? And they'd just kind of smile, never a word about what happened or what went on, but they had a good time. And lastly, I just want to talk about his generosity. When I was up for a promotion, the faculty, my team of evaluators, determined that I was unfit and that I was not doing a good job, that I should not get tenure, that the writing program that I directed was flawed, even though they didn't have the capacity to determine that, and that I should just be delayed for a while to see if I could improve. I learned about this report days before the faculty vote, and I was understandably rather devastated. And Marcus came to me and he said, we are going to turn this around. He got out the name of faculty, he got out the names of people who voted, and he started counting, and he started going door to door to door to talk to people and have them discuss what was wrong with me and what was wrong with this report. And in the end, it was a unanimous vote. But here was this man who so terrified me, who went out of his way to make the rounds, to hunt down and talk to his faculty colleagues, and saved my career for me. So I am always grateful for you, Marcus, in so many ways. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Now we're going to hear from Kevin Ellis. Kevin is a graduate of the law school from 2013 and one of Marcus's closest friends.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin, a friend and a former student at Franklin Pierce. Marcus was an expert storyteller, and anyone who was fortunate enough to hear his stories might learn something from them. I wanted to offer a few of these stories to those who may not have heard them. One representative story about Marcus is when he adopted his cat, Gracie. She was a fully grown cat who was not a fan of people. I offered to get him a kitten from the local SPCA, Pope Memorial. Most wanted to adopt the kittens, but Marcus preferred the older cats with character. And besides, the kittens didn't need rescuing as badly as the older cat. She recently died from lung cancer, but it gave Marcus some comfort knowing her last years were spent loved in New Hampshire. You'll see that his humanity here wasn't limited to cats. As I wrote in the obituary, Marcus Hurn was the patron saint of lost causes at the law school. He once told me about a Polish engineer who was struggling after his first semester. The student had grades that were difficult to return from. Many professors would have just written him off as not lawyer material. But Marcus liked the uphill battles. He researched the topic, and had meetings with the student to get at the heart of the problem. And then it came to him. The student needed an analogy to what he already knew. The student needed to express legal problems in algorithmic form using Polish notation. He went from F's to A's by the next semester. Like many attorneys, Marcus ultimately considered himself a problem solver, and this was just another problem to solve. His life is a lesson in grit and determination. He was the most senior faculty not to retire. And during the last year, he still came to campus to teach his live class. He was duty-bound. He never missed a doctor's appointment either. He had major hip surgery just before passing away, but he was determined not to miss class and not to miss an appointment. It was part of his constitution. Just a week before he passed away, he didn't have his walker and fell so bad it required a hospital visit. He went to class the very next day. I have to say, if I eat bad tacos, I consider taking a sick day. And perhaps that's a generational divide. The last several years have been difficult for him in terms of losing loved ones. Jack Capellas, who many of you may know, one of Marcus's favorite students and a former roommate, passed away from cancer. John Crachetti, Kent Karrison, Brian Hauserman, and many other friends passed away. Marcus mentioned that he had Mary Pilkington Casey as a former student, and she went on to have a long career at the law school. Some of you may have had her as a professor. Sadly, she also passed away in 2016. Many of the professors over the years were his former students. Now, just a little on his biography. He grew up gay in the 1950s and 60s. Itself no easy task. And then to lose so many friends and heroes to HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s. Some men would shrink from the responsibility to publicly advocate for gay rights during that time. Not Marcus. He just saw more problems to be solved. Fortunately, he had a supportive family in Missouri. His father was a U.S. attorney appointed by President Richard Nixon. His mother was a nurse. He chose a professional path that combined the better features of both: the caring, nurturing side of his mother and the Socratic logic from his father. Students of history may have heard of the Greek paradox called the Ship of Theseus. The idea is you take away planks of wood from a ship and replace them. At what point is it no longer the original ship? Socrates and Plato had ideas about the forms of things being what's important. Some would look at a river for the answer. It is never the same water, but always the same river. To me, it's about relationships between the planks. You take out a plank and you put in a new one. What is important is the connection between the planks, not the individual units. Each plank of wood is important in its own way. If just one were absent from the hull, the ship could sink. And they are all important to one another, as they fit together like a puzzle. The legacy Marcus leaves is in all of us. To stay true to our form, to stay strong against external pressure, and to stay afloat. He will not be easily replaced at the law school, and he will never be replaced in our lives. We'll miss you, Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Right now we'll hear from Victoria Sachs, who graduated this year from the law school, and she was a student of Marcus's, also a TA for him.
I was very, very lucky to be one of Professor Hurn's students. As any of my classmates or his former students can tell you, being in Professor Hurn's class was a unique privilege, a sometimes wild adventure, and at our school, a rite of passage. Professor Hurn earned my unconditional respect and admiration during one of our very first contracts classes, when a bird suddenly and very graphically flew to its death into a window in room 229. I exchanged horrified looks with my classmates and wondered if this was an omen for law school. Without missing a beat or his place in his lecture, Professor Hurn shrugged without shrugging and observed, "Birds will do that." It was so objective and funny and true, and I knew right then that I was a fan. In many ways, he was the quintessential law school professor, from his seemingly infinite knowledge of the law, and not only the courses he taught, but the law and its history, to his three-piece suit and bow tie, which he wore to every lecture he taught. Yes, even the 8 a.m. Zoom lectures during the first weeks of COVID, when the rest of the world decided to stay in our pajamas. But in reflecting on his teaching with my friends and classmates, what we will remember him most by is the uniquely human perspective that he brought to the law. In the first-year curriculum, we learned that the law is about rules and doctrine. We learn how to brief cases, how to think like a lawyer, how to use words that most people don't use. And as you're trying to grasp the substantive and procedural legal issues in your first-year courses, it is easy to forget that there are people behind these cases. But Professor Hurn would not let us forget. Many of you will remember his preferred course recitation format, which began with, "Who are the parties and what do they want?" The following is from Professor Hurn's contract syllabus after 1, "Who are the parties?" 2, plaintiff's objectives. State no law here. Law will be the tool for getting to the objective, but the objective is something else. Usually it is money. Sometimes it is recovery of property. Sometimes it is revenge. While this is usually the shortest, simplest step of your analysis, you should pause to reflect and record what the goal is. Too many lawyers lose sight of it. As my friend John put it, Professor Hurn liked to remind you that you were human and that the law was a human endeavor. During cold calls, he would throw us off by asking off-script questions. Why did the prisoner sue the guard when he knew he couldn't win? Just to test us, to see if our ordinary human instincts were still engaged. His way of teaching made the law colorful. It made it come to life. It made otherwise abstract formal concepts seem real. For me, I loved any time he described an operation of the law as spooky, like how modifications under Article 2 require no consideration to be binding. Spooky. And I memorized fixtures based on the definition he shared, anything that 5 monkeys with a hammer cannot disassemble within 10 minutes. I asked my classmates what some of their favorite memories of Professor Hurn's teaching were. A common one was the example he used when teaching adverse possession of the granny land wrestler in Provincetown, who over time pushed her fence over her property line to legally steal acres of land. And of course, none of us will ever say that the Uniform Commercial Code only applies to merchants, because Professor Hurn told us he would automatically fail any student who did. As his student, it seemed like the only thing Professor Hurn loved more than the law was teaching it. He cared about his students, about our education, our future practice, and our mental health. We were all grateful for the generous predictability of his first round of cold calls. He absolutely showed his cards so that students in the first row could see who was up next. He told us that it was natural to panic and forget everything during the first 10 minutes of an exam. He said if you could just breathe and wait out those 10 minutes, you'd be fine. He told me that he built an extra 10 minutes into every exam he wrote for that reason. As his TA, he would often tell me that he was worried he wasn't being tough enough on students during cold calls and that he had gotten too soft. But I assured him that none of the students in the class felt that way. Since his passing, I have been thinking back on the 1L cocktail party he hosted at his home, where a small group of us sat around him in a circle as he talked late into the night about the law, his career, and life. One of the last songs on the playlist that he made for the party was the song Fernando. I remember talking to him about how much I love ABBA, and we talked about the lyrics of the song, which he felt had earned it a recent resurgence in popularity. If you don't know it, it's a song about a revolutionary who at the end of his life had no regrets. And the song goes, "If I had to do the same again, I would, my friend, Fernando." There could be no final song more perfect for any time spent with Professor Hurn. To me, Professor Hurn will always be the greatest teacher and lawyer I have ever met. He taught me how to care about the law and how to prioritize the people and human needs it was designed to protect. I was very, very lucky to be one of his students.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Right now, I'd like to invite Ellen Muzinski to the stage to talk about life with Marcus as a colleague. She joined the faculty in 1980, the same year as Professor Hurn. I think they joined within 6 months of one another.
I, like most of you, am struggling to both cope with and understand Marcus's death. It's an odd year to do that, as the full impact of his loss has not yet struck me, as we were working remotely for the past year. But I do think about him daily. He's appearing in my dreams. I said this to somebody on the way in. This week we went and bought a car together, which I didn't really understand because that was not part of our relationship, but he ended up buying a new Chrysler this week. When he's in my dreams, he's always much younger and always ready to make good trouble. I spent 40 years working with Marcus. I feel angry at times that he left me. I know that's not rational, and when it gets intense, and it does, I'm reminded that death is part of the order that allows new people and things to be born. Maybe the world, the school, his family, and the GLBT community will continue to see better days. Marcus, as most of you know, was a leader in the civil rights movement for the gay and lesbian community. I can't say this was an early mission, as I believe when he started as a law professor, he was more concerned with business and tax policy. And he did continue that work throughout his years. But New Hampshire in the 1980s was a hostile place for the gay community. And Marcus, reluctantly at first, became a brilliant strategic and policy leader. In 1984, the world encountered AIDS, and many people unwillingly came out when they became ill. And it also became open season, well, in New Hampshire and really across the country, for legislation that negatively impacted the community. There were just so many awful bills. The most prominent prohibited anyone with a gay or lesbian in their house from adopting or serving as a foster parent or working in a daycare center. This brought many people, including Marcus, fully out of the closet, and things really started to change. The era of the expansion of rights for gays and lesbians in New Hampshire started when Marcus and others formed CAGLA, Citizens Alliance for Gay and Lesbian Rights, and really started advocating for protections. This may not seem like a big deal today, but when we had the first meeting and we tried to take attendance, we could not. Many who came were terrified to have their name on a list that identified them as even being allied with the gay community. Happily, the advocacy produced results. New Hampshire passed a unique hate crimes law. The Human Rights Statute was amended to prohibit discrimination. In a uniquely New Hampshire statute, people were allowed to nominate who would serve as their guardian. And in 1999, the state finally repealed the so-called foster care prohibition. And then, just under 10 years later, the New Hampshire Civil Unions Law took effect. New Hampshire was the fourth state to pass a law authorizing civil unions, and it was the first to do so without an order from a court. This achievement might seem a mistake, but it was indeed a well-planned strategy. And it was designed to build public and political support rather than have a court make an order. Marcus was squarely behind this strategy and used to say that if somebody filed a marriage case, he would file in opposition to it, based on his belief that the law was something we should do through our other branches of government. Marriage became law January 1st, 2010. What special does this have to do with Marcus? He worked on most of these pieces of legislation as an author and an advocate. There were many others. And Marcus would attribute equal recognition to them. But I believe he would be wrong, and he was the primary reason that New Hampshire is a leader in these areas. Marcus was, by intellect and nature, primarily conservative. His understanding of how advancing the rights of all was really a human rights issue, not a liberal principle, made it possible for him to ally with then Republican leaders and to persuade enough of them that this was fair policy. LGBT rights became a nonpartisan issue in this state and remains so until this day. We owe this legacy to Professor Hurn. Others have or will speak about Professor Hurn as a teacher and a colleague, but I want to say a few words. UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law is a school where all students can thrive. The lack of an award ceremony at graduation, again, is not a mistake, but is a product of his understanding that the achievement of a law degree is equal for all our graduates. Our school is rich with opportunity to learn to practice, and he was a champion of skills-based education right from the beginning. There were others, of course, but Marcus was the last faculty member of those whose DNA made us such a special institution. The hardest part is talking about Marcus as a friend. We spent a lot of time together through the years, and he was a just wonderful source of comfort when life's twists were a challenge. He had great insight for me on getting me to learn to let go of great. Indeed, he taught me to not work to perfection, though I expect for him it was much easier since he actually knew everything and I don't. Above all, we shared a love of teaching, though even in my 30s, I would see that there would be a time for me when I was ready to stop. And Marcus would say that this was his calling. As his health was declining, we had conversations where I urged him to cut back, and he would have none of it. He planned to die with chalk in his hands, a metaphor for continuing to be a full professor up to the time of his death. It was way too early for all of us, and I know that included Marcus, but I do take some solace in knowing he was Professor Hurn until the end.
Thank you so much, Ellen. We've heard about Marcus as a colleague. We've heard from a student. We've heard from his good friend Kevin. What I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Kevin O'Shea, who will talk from an alumni perspective about Marcus, and then we're going to open it up to comments from all of you, so be thinking about that in the next few minutes. Kevin?
Professor Marcus Hurn, lawyer, teacher, mentor, friend. For many reasons, I am an imperfect narrator to speak on behalf of the alumni of the Franklin Pierce Law Center and now the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law. Primarily because Marcus's experience with students varied from person to person and by the seasons of his life. For alumni he knew from the 70s and taught in the 80s, Marcus was a young man. He shared their triumphs and tragedies as a near peer. Then again, Marcus, in many ways, had no peers, near or otherwise. For alumni of the 90s and the aughts, his relationships perhaps more avuncular. For those in later years, more parental, or dare I speak it, grandfatherly. Marcus wanted to connect alumni of different generations because all boats rise on an incoming tide. You see, Marcus knew from his time at Yale, although he tended to demur whenever New Haven was mentioned, the value of connections. Marcus's name alone was a calling card for older alums to connect with newer alums in the New Hampshire Bar, the IP Bar, or wherever our graduates may be found. A younger alum could be put at ease when asked to recall a favorite Marcus Hurn maxim. Of those fit for recitation in a memorial event, I'm especially fond of, the law has to account for a certain amount of fools whose numbers vary with the generations. I'm sure you have your own favorite Marcus Hurn quotation. Or perhaps, at times, alums connected by comparing their Myers-Briggs personality types as administered by Marcus at countless 1L orientations. As an aside, I should note that Marcus never thought that the results of that test were any form of predestination. For instance, he always rejected the premise that I was an ISTJ for life. And speaking of Myers-Briggs, I should also note that one of the difficulties of speaking today is that Marcus was, for lack of a better term, an introverted extrovert, meaning he reveled in his time in the well of the rich room. However, there was a shyness about him that was sometimes mistaken for aloofness. Marcus loved it when his students, or better yet groups of students, came to his office to go over old exams. He used those encounters as a barometer of his effectiveness of his teaching in any given semester. Marcus always knew how to draw you out, to learn what practice areas excited you, and to connect you with someone who might be able to help you, whether now or in the future. There were countless times that an alum with a particularly thorny problem would send a young associate to Marcus to untie a legal Gordian knot. And perhaps that underlies the most fundamental part of Marcus's identity. He was a son, a brother, a cousin, an uncle, a professor, a friend, but most of all, he was a lawyer. He could be found in the legislature, crafting statutes dealing with corporate formation or equality, and he could always be found in a courthouse, both trial and appellate. He once told me about watching a self-represented party under siege from both opposing counsel and the judge. Marcus was not particularly sympathetic to the self-represented party's views, but he disliked bullies even more. Marcus stepped in and brought the proceeding to a rapid close. And like Aesop's fable of the lion and the mouse, years later, the self-represented party stood up for Marcus when he was seeking legislative reforms for equality. Scores of lawyers in New Hampshire, D.C., and throughout the country had Marcus on retainer. Some of us paid in cash. Some of us repaid his kindness with a cigar. A word about Marcus's cigars. Almost as much a trademark as his sartorial choices, many an alum can recall the vision of Marcus striding down Rumford Street, wearing a three-piece suit and a bow tie, a scant few minutes before a 1 p.m. property class, with the Duke-Meyer text under his arm and a Rothschild punch in his hand. In the same way, Marcus could be found at Castro's back room here in Concord at 7 p.m. on most Friday nights during the school year. There, he took delight introducing his current students or recent graduates to more seasoned alums. The conversation covered anything from canon law, medieval law, the Code of Hammurabi, British colonial history, or perhaps a slip opinion only issued earlier that day. And those of us who truly got to know Marcus, first as a professor, then as a mentor, and later as a friend, will miss the parts of himself that he shared. His love of his family, the stories of his father's time as U.S. Attorney in Missouri, his love for his late mother, his brother, his niece, as well as his extended family, including generations of beloved cats. I remember sitting on a bench at the end of McMillan Pier in Provincetown on any one of a dozen sunny summer afternoons, listening to Marcus talk about you, his students, alums, and colleagues. You see, Marcus was preparing us for the practice from our first day of class with him. The image of him as faculty marshal leading students across Pierce Bridge to graduation was a metaphor for the work he had been doing for years. It's no secret that Marcus enjoyed demonstrating the contours of the law by drafting final exams that appeared, at least on the surface, very similar. For example, the addition of the word not frequently transformed one of his most famous property exam characters, Pierre, from watch thief into gratuitous bailee. My favorite class with Marcus was Conflicts of Law, but Conflicts really wasn't about comedy or full faith and credit. It was Marcus on the law. The directions in the final exam for Conflicts read like this. This examination is for 3 hours, entirely open book. Please do not fill your answers with quotations from cases or the restatement or extracts from your outlines. Answer the question asked. If something appears to be mistaken, plainly state a corrective assumption and proceed with your answer. Do not assume familiar questions are identical to those in good exams. That is, my friend, as good a set of instructions for the life of a future lawyer, for a life well lived, as has ever been offered under this tent. So how do we sum up the life of Marcus Burt Justin Hurn? I am reminded of the eulogy that Clarence Darrow, one of the greatest trial lawyers in American history, gave for his friend John Peter Altgeld, the former governor of Illinois, who died in 1902. I think these words apply equally to our friend Marcus, who, in many ways, gave his life for this school. My dear, dear friend, long and well we have known you. Devotedly we have followed you. Implicitly we have trusted you. Fondly we have loved you. Beside your bier, we must now say farewell. The heartless call has come, and we must stagger on the best we can, alone. In the darkest hours, we will look in vain for your loved form. We will listen hopelessly for your devoted and fearless voice. But though we lay you in the grave and hide you from the sight of man, your brave words will speak for the poor, the oppressed, the captive, for the weak. And your devoted life inspire countless souls to do and dare in the holy cause for which you lived and died.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Kevin was a protege of Marcus's and frequently accompanied him to Castro's, as I understand it. And is a partner at Soloway and Hollis. Is that the order that you've in your bio, like on the firm's website? It's like protege of Marcus's, cigars at Castro's, partner. Right now, we'd love to open it up and have people speak. I will be taking around a portable mic, which I will be cleaning, and I'm also wearing gloves. I'm also fully vaccinated. So if anyone wants to speak, I'll go ahead and just kind of take it around to where you are. Okay. Are these the wipes that I should be? Oh, I need my mask. Hold on. Perhaps say your name and who you are.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vincenzo Biella, class of 18. When I first heard that story about the failing student, I thought it was a story about me. But it makes sense that Professor Hurn has had this effect on generations of students. As for myself, in my first semester, I had a 1.9, and I was assigned to Professor Hurn to meet with him regularly so that he could guide me through this whole law school process. And when I got to my first meeting with him, he said in his succinct way, "You seem to know the material." Great. And so why are my grades like this? And we went through old exams, and I'd have the correct answer most of the time, but I wouldn't go into detail sufficient to get all the points. And he would say, "So," in the way that he says, and just a little thing like that stuck with me and helped me through everything, every exam I took from then on, is that I'm going to write the answer that I think is correct, and then I'm going to keep doing Professor Hurn's line of questioning until I get to something that is a little more passable than what I had. And he guided me through every semester. I wasn't a good student. Some of the people here know that. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have graduated. I have no question in my mind that I would not have graduated. I would have dropped out after the first semester, and I would have done something else. And I'm deeply indebted to the man, and that's all. And I miss him. I wish I could have seen him again.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask people to come up here from now on so that we can make sure to catch the live stream so that you're on camera as well.
Hi, Shane Stewart, class of 2004. Marcus was definitely a lion, and much like what Sophie said, I was very scared of him in law school, and I never said a word to him. Once I graduated, out of necessity, I had to contact Marcus because I was running a firm on my own, and I was basically taking everything that came in through the door. And so I quickly got in over my head, and so I had to call Marcus. And Marcus was very gracious and very easy to talk to and very down to earth, but he was scary. I mean, the man was a lion. And for the next 25, 26 years, Marcus was on retainer at my law firm. I probably spoke to him every week. I probably did close to 100 cases with Marcus, and he would call me to do cases with him, which primarily consisted of organizing the file, driving him to court. I'm very organized. And Marcus actually didn't like to speak in court. He'd make me speak, and he'd have his outline, and he'd be pointing. But Marcus, I watched the movie A Tale of Two Cities, and Marcus reminds me of one of the lawyers in the movie, the 1935 Charles Dickens movie that was based on. Marcus was wicked smart. A couple things: he loved Ellen, spoke of her nonstop. He spoke of Sophie a lot, and loved you as well, because he would always, Sophie Sparrow, I go, yeah, I think I know Sophie Sparrow. But he oftentimes talked about you very highly. Kevin O'Shea, you as well. I think you were teaching real property. And Kevin C., I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name, that was the love of his Marcus's life. His father, Bert, all the stories about Ashley, his brother, nonstop stories. And Marcus loved the work that Ashley did and the good that Ashley brought to the community. He thought it was extremely important and supported it. His lovely niece, Danielle, and he was the consonant professor. That's all he wanted to do. But I used to just love, actually I picked up a case once, in over my head, and it was a toxic waste case. And then Masri and Vidito, of Aaron Brockovich fame, came into town, and they said, can we do the case with you? And I said, yes. And then within a couple of months, I had 120 plaintiffs, direct actions. And then the primary litigator from the Brockovich firm came in and said, well, is there anybody else here we can hire that's really good? And I said, Marcus Hurn. And Marcus took over the case. And everybody knew when we went to court, Marcus was the only one who would speak. Once I was in court, and it was against a firm out of Connecticut, that was the lead counsel. I looked around the room, the judge, there was 5 counsel on the other side, and then on our table, in the Masri and Vidito people, they were sitting in the bleacher. They were back in the bleachers just watching me, Marcus, and Bob Morgan. Marcus had taught everybody in the courtroom. He was their professor, including the judge. And it had to do with the damage to the real property, and Marcus started off about 500 years, and it wasn't even close. And Marcus, what he would do is he wouldn't bring notes, he'd bring a big sketchboard, this big board, and with tree diagrams, and he would just start, and he talked for about an hour, and it was just wonderful. And the judge was just sitting there enjoying it. But, I love Marcus. We had very much a professional relationship. It was weird. Later on, I would drive him to the airport and do things, but Marcus was a very proud man and very private, introverted, but just so brilliant. And the other day, I was talking to my law partner, Fritz Mokel, who also went to Franklin Pierce, and I said, what are we going to do, Fritz? Because at 10 o'clock at night, we're doing the brief, we're getting ready for the appeal, whatever it is, we'd call Marcus, and Marcus either knew a recent opinion, he either drafted the legislation, or he advocated a position, and he never had to look things up, he just knew. And then I'd hang up the phone, and I'd look at Fritz, and I'd say, see? And then I'd send him a check. Because I never wanted to take from Marcus. But he will be missed.
Would anyone else like to come up and share a few words? Great.
My name is Rafe Granger. I graduated in 97. I had the reverse effect with Marcus. When I first met him, I'm like, this guy's cool. Probably because I'm an ENTJ, so my introvert came out. And I'm like, he wears a 3-piece suit and a bow tie. I had him in contracts, and I really enjoyed that with him. And then I had the honor to be his TA after that. And I have 2 Marcus stories for you. I took some of his other courses, debtor-creditor and conflict. I don't know. If Marcus taught it, I took it. It was my philosophy. And I'll never forget, he's 18. I didn't take that many. Yeah, I didn't take that many. Maybe 4 or 5 over the years. But he, I think it was debtor-creditor or one of those, and he's helped earn some of my clients money because I would do debtor-creditor work, and I'd represent people who are owed money. And Marcus taught us once that a Harley-Davidson is not a motor vehicle in New Hampshire. And the reason why that's important means you can attach a Harley-Davidson, and it's not exempt, even if there's debt on it. So people would owe my little deck builder guy like $8,000, and I'd sue the person's Harley-Davidson and get the attachment, and they'd pay right away. And I was like, oh, Marcus, you're like helping the little people, as he used to sometimes say. I think Bruce might have said that. And the other story I'll never remember, and it has no implication, but I'll always remember, was we're doing creditor law, and we were learning about some case where somebody attached dogs, like prize-winning dogs. So the next case came in, and somebody tried to attach champion cats. And Marcus went on one of his history lessons, and the end of it was something like, and I'll just quote it the way he quoted it, I'll quote it the way he quoted it. And he said, the Supreme Court came down, and he said, no man owns a cat. And I just always remember that to this day. I guess it had some practical, because now I knew not to go try to attach cats. So that's my story. Marcus will be missed. I would be more in the friend-mentor category about every 8 years or so. I was like, oh, I should see what Marcus is up to. And he was always so gracious. We'd meet in his office or sometimes for cocktails. And I just want to say one last thing to Professor Sparrow. Thank God he fought for you, because the stuff you've taught me from when we first began. And also Professor Muzinski, you taught me. If you want to know what it was, I'll share it with you. I'm sure you don't remember, but to this day it was so helpful. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jeff Gallagher, class of 2013. Marcus was a precious person. You know, you've heard about how he made the state of New Hampshire better. He made the law school better, touched thousands of people, and was a cherished friend. Kevin and I would join him for dinner at Cheers and listen to him opine about recent developments in New Hampshire law or a U.S. Supreme Court case. And those are precious moments for me, to hear him share his perspective and wisdom. And he was always willing to help. You've heard from all the alumni about how he was always willing to pick up the phone. And we were all lucky to know him, and I consider myself lucky to have considered him a friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We should probably be wrapping up. Any final comments before? Okay.
Hi, I'm Mark Vandendyke, class 2007. I'll keep this quick. Interesting little tidbit. I'm hanging out in the lobby of Franklin Pierce one time, waiting for class to start, looking at notes, and I hear Marcus off to the side and Mary Wong, and Marcus mentions, yes, last night about 3 a.m. I was listening to German public radio, and I heard your voice, Mary, and Mary's very modest. It was something I was doing for the IGF, and thank you very much. And all I could think of is, who on God's green earth was listening to German public radio at 3 a.m.? Marcus, right? Yeah. But on a practical note, he did save another student, not me. I won't mention his name, but he's a good friend of mine, and he wouldn't have walked across that stage if Marcus didn't arrange to have him go to Ireland for the summer program, take an additional class, and get enough credits and graduate. So that's just the kind of guy he was. Thank you.
Thank you. I might add, one of the things as kind of a new person to the community in the last 4 years, I travel around and talk to alumni a lot, and one of the things I have noticed is that we have a lot of marriages that happen from this law school. And my experience in law school and teaching at other schools is that law school is more likely to break up relationships than it is to bring people together. Once the Latin acronyms the Latin phrases start to come in, it's all over for most relationships. But I think, it's interesting because I've noticed at these alumni gatherings, we met and got married at UNH Franklin Pierce. So we've even talked about doing, an alumni newsletter at some point where we talk about, all of the children that kind of came from, the impact, the legacy of all of these marriages that come from the law school. And I was trying to figure out what is different about us. And I realized fairly quickly that I think it's Marcus, because he says something to first-year students, and you all can correct me if I get this wrong. If you don't have someone to snuggle with by the time it's winter, you better just snuggle up with your Black's Law Dictionary, and that's it. And I think that statement has encouraged people to couple up for 4 decades now. And so for a gay man, he is responsible for many, many children that have come across this country and around the world. We would love, thank you so much for joining us today. We would love for you to join us also at Cheers. We will be doing a toast at Cheers, and that's going to be at 12:30, is that right? So right away. And you can have a drink on us. And who's going to be giving the toast, Ellen?
Richard Fogel.
Okay. Richard Fogel. Wonderful. Class of 2012, Richard Fogel. And we would all like for you to join us there. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks to the Hurn family and all of you who've joined us by live stream today.